Hi there. The Star Wars Andor TV series just finished its first season a few weeks ago, which was critically acclaimed and is really starting to break the glass ceiling at major awards circuits for sci-fi and fantasy. We're seeing major nominations for acting, for writing categories. And one of the major reasons it was so critically acclaimed was for being overtly political, very political. Instead of focusing on just, space combat or Mandalorian super soldiers or Jedi Knights fighting with magic and laser swords, it focused on the ground-level insurrection against the Galactic Empire, a totalitarian, authoritarian state. Star Wars has always been political, in case you haven't been paying attention. That these are themes that were in the earliest draft notes that George Lucas had in the 1970s, about how the core story is how the Galactic Republic turned into the Empire. The Galactic Empire in Star Wars is a totalitarian, authoritarian state, but is it a fascist state? There have been many totalitarian, authoritarian regimes, those are broad terms, that the Soviet Union was authoritarian, that Pol Pot's Cambodia was totalitarian, that these are terms that could be applied to communist regimes. What does fascism specifically mean? So could the Galactic Empire be said to be fascist, as they have presented it so far? And what could be featured in Season 2 or other spin-offs during the height of the Empire to really emphasize this? Thinking not just shows, but books, comics, just themes that it could present. Now, they just said that while they originally planned for Andor to run 5 seasons, that this would be logistically too much of a burden, that just the scale they're working on top of that, that it's supposed to be a prequel. The actors wouldn't look that young by the final season. So I get the scale of it, but they said what they're going to do is, just as Season 1 had 3-episode chapters, 4 chapters for a total of 12, Season 2, there will be major time skips between each chapter, so every 3 episodes will be 1 year, which was originally planned as a full season. But this is part of the larger Star Wars metaverse, so I imagine these stories will be rounded out with other crossovers in comics, other TV shows. I mean, the Mon Mothma storyline could easily have its own spin-off in a different setting. Luthen's group, Vel, other people could have their own spin-offs and shows, so it's not just the grueling pace of the Andor show, but I understand. So this isn't just for Andor, you understand, but for every Star Wars project during the height of the Empire, like other young Han Solo stuff, or even The Bad Batch, the cartoon show, which is more the early rise of the Empire. Just what is the ethos of the Empire, its propaganda, is its mentality, this fascist state, this fascist society. And going through my analysis, I only realized at the end of scripting this that they'd actually done a pretty good job of this already, and that one of the most crucial points was already embodied by, of all people, Mon Mothma's daughter. Mon Mothma's daughter might be the character they're setting up who best exemplifies the rise of fascism in society. On the broad level, she's not a politician, on the broad level of pro-fascist social attitudes. As you may have noticed, that I'm making this, full 2 months after Season 1 ended. Well, I marathoned it over Christmas break, and if you're new to my channel, I posted a long-form podcast review of Andor Season 1 around New Year's. And I said at the end, I'm splitting off. Part 2 is going to be more of a specific study of how it historically matches up with the rise of fascism. Then I got a really bad chest cold, lost my voice for a month, and come February I said, it's so long after Season 1, I might as well wait until The Mandalorian comes out when more people are searching for Star Wars content, so here we are. That's why this is late. And because I'm running late, this is also going to be an audio-only podcast. And for a second reason, I realized, if part of this is me breaking down, the symbols that fascist propaganda uses, and how it co-opts things from, Nazi Germany, fascist Italy, I would get demonetized on YouTube for showing this imagery, even though it's in a historical context, even though I'm condemning it. I'm pointing out, look how they're just copying stuff, or they're reusing symbols from other things. like big, hardcore, professional history channels by real historians can do that kind of thing. I don't have the pushback on that. The automatic shutdown stuff with it, so I can't, like, show images of what I'm talking about in here. But I've seen documentaries and stuff about the big thing, and I'll talk about this later, is during the Nuremberg marches, just all of the different symbols they're using. I'll bring that up again, but this is an audio-only podcast. You can leave it on in the background. And I can't use imagery. There isn't enough time anyway. But I'm trying to break this down. So how am I going to analyze, is the Galactic Empire not just authoritarian, but specifically a fascist state? Well, the theme of this whole video is I'm comparing it against the classic essay Ur-Fascism by Italian author Umberto Eco, who's also director, that he grew up in Mussolini's Italy. And growing up there, he realized that, and in later years, fascism is a very ambiguous term. Fascism, the specific term, was originally coined by Mussolini's regime in reference to fasces, this bundled group of 10 sticks used as a club in ancient Rome, which came to be a symbol of state power, the club that we hit things with. But as other regimes came to be called fascist, that by middle of the war they were calling Nazi Germany also fascist, but they came second, what did they mean exactly? What was the underlying ideology? That something like democracy, fascism means the core ancestral spirit of it. Well, in his essay, Umberto Eco starts out by explaining in his preamble, this is an inherently a catch-all term, often amorphously defined. And here's the key point: even holding contradictory ideas at the same time in the same regime. And it's ambiguous what exactly distinguishes authoritarian from outright fascist regimes. And he acknowledged all this and said, it's difficult, but I'm going to establish these 14 points, these 14 major features often exhibited by fascist regimes. As this trained historian who lived through fascist Italy, he said, I've narrowed it down to this, though he stressed that a state doesn't need every single one of these points to be fascist. It's a general guide, and it could have just a few of these to be considered fascist. Now, I'll frequently be referring to Nazi Germany as I go down this list, just because it's more widely known than Mussolini's fascist Italy, but they all follow many of these points. So, going through his list, this is my observation, not his. He did say they're all interrelated. I think they fall into certain groupings. So we can simplify this from 14 major points into 4 or 5 major themes that we could check against how the Galactic Empire is presented and how we might present it in the future to really emphasize with historical accuracy this is behaving like a fascist regime. So I condensed some of those down. I'm starting with the easy ones, but the final one will be the most important one. The first of these is 4 points in one. 4 points to one theme. I'm not going in the order he did, I'm just grouping them. Fascism will see, point 1, rejection of rationalism. Point 2, the cult of direct action and distrust of intellectualism. Point 3, rejection of analytical criticism and anyone disagreeing is treason. There is no discussion anymore. And point 4, it has a lot of new speak. This isn't just an accident, it is very intentional. They'll make neologisms, they'll coin new words to limit critical thinking. Propaganda spin, catchphrases that people will repeat rather than actually admitting the temporary detainment camp is really a prison camp, that they'll change the meaning of words, they'll use acronyms to dissociate that your mind knows actually calling it what it is bad, and discourage critical thinking. All of this can be condensed down to one phrase, of one theme, I think, just in general for our purposes in Star Wars. Anti-intellectualism and propaganda. This could really apply to any authoritarian regime, though. It could apply to communist states. That they don't want people who have critical thinking. You're a doer, not a thinker. Never criticize anything. change the meaning of words so that they're not really in propaganda spin, so they don't sound like what you're actually doing. Anti-intellectualism propaganda. That's the first theme we're putting on our final list for the Empire. Next, we have, and this is tied to the first theme, point 5, eternal militarism. This principle of permanent struggle. Now, I'm trying to do this on a basic level. If you've read 1984 and Animal Farm by George Orwell, this matches up pretty well, even though Orwell was talking about a communist regime. That this principle of, we are always fighting Eurasia, we are always fighting East Asia, and he realizes the concept of we are always fighting an enemy out to get you means that people will always put trust in the government and not realize that they are the enemy. It's tricked them into someone's out to get you, only I can save you. So point 5, eternal militarism, the principle of permanent struggle. It's bizarre that they have all, like Nazi Germany would have this constant rhetoric in their propaganda that we have to fight the enemy, we have to fight the enemy, but even if they conquered the world, there would never be a final victory because they need an external enemy to propagandize the people against. That if they had conquered the world, it would just be their subversives everywhere. That you're never really achieving final victory, that you need an enemy against externally. Point 6, related to this, is the cult of heroic death. Part of that warrior thing. You're trained to think your life is meaningless, that you aren't supposed to be an intellectual or a lawyer criticizing things the government does, that the idealized person is this tough guy warrior soldier who will go out in the battlefield and martyr himself, taking out 10 enemies with him to die for the state. Also heavily interrelated with this is point 7, machismo. And Echo pointed this out, and there's a lot of examples of it. It ties into the militarism and martyring yourself thing. Is extension of the militarism is this whole cult of manliness. So fascist regimes tend to be intolerant towards women or other sexualities. Not just homosexuality, but even chastity. So, which is bizarre. So Nazi Germany persecuted homosexuals, didn't trust the chaste clergy of Christian religious groups, and their concept of women was you're supposed to, I think it was, I know the acronym in German, but I've forgotten it. It's Children Church Kitchen, I think, was the mantra that Nazi Germany developed for women. It's, you're supposed to be at home breeding new soldiers as a mother. There was no role for women in Nazi Germany. In contrast, communist regimes like the Soviet Union, women were often in relatively high places, and this happens in a couple of other regimes. It's not as if it was this feminist utopia, but compared to relatively high-ranking women in the Soviet Union in the service corps, that there was this real ethos of be the warrior, be this. They had this bizarre, again, it's propaganda, hyped ideal of the ancient Aryan warrior, this Germanic Aryan warrior who's this tough guy beating up the other civilizations. So it's an extension of that. That there's this link between military prowess and sexual prowess. This womanizer. And you see this a lot with Mussolini, actually. Mussolini would, again, I can't post photos of the imagery on YouTube, I get demonetized. Mussolini was always posing shirtless or going hunting. Tell me if you're from Italy, tell me if you've heard of any of this in the comments section, that it was a thing that was eventually, the international media would mock, of how he'd always be posing shirtless, hunting, acting like a tough guy. And yes, there are direct parallels which major historians have pointed out, not me, in the past decade, that Russia's Putin has been doing the exact same thing. When he's like emphasizing, I know judo, I'm riding a horse shirtless, I'm capturing tigers. This is what Mussolini did. He'd go out hunting shirtless, and it's like, think of how weird that is for like a society that had lived through the late 1800s, where it's like Victorian era, to have this guy who's like, I'm this country hunter guide. He wasn't. He was a newspaper man. But the Nazis couldn't do that as much because Hitler wasn't really that much of a tough guy. But that's an infamous contradiction, that like Hitler and Goebbels looked nothing like that. But in their propaganda, the idealized Aryan was this shirtless warrior wrestling an aurochs into the ground with his toughness. That's the image they wanted for the pure Aryan warrior. So this is all linked. The eternal militarism. It's that you never defeat the enemy fully. Even if you conquer the world, there's always someone you're fighting internal enemies. This idea that individual soldiers' lives are not just meaningless, but it's an honor to heroically sacrifice yourself for the state. And this machismo thing. We can condense all of that down for Star Wars purposes to just one word: militarism. That, like, the different planets and species in the Galactic Empire don't necessarily have the same gender roles that match it up neatly. Thinking in Star Wars terms, their history is very different, or the different species are different. So I don't know if, like, the machismo thing can really play into that, but this cult of militarism, that we must be strong, we must build order, and our order is built in our military to maintain order within the galaxy. That you don't want things to fall apart again, let's have a strong military to support the state. But just as with the anti-intellectualism propaganda, theme 2 here, militarism, could easily be said about communism and other authoritarian regimes. I mean, there was militarism in the Soviet Union, or North Korea. Maybe not the machismo thing as much, but glorifying the military. Urging men not to think, but to be tough guy warriors gladly sacrificing their lives on the battlefield. That's part of it. But we're already halfway through his list. This is 7 points I've condensed into 2 things. And it's still, this could easily apply to fascism. I'm going to start getting the specific stuff. A little more. Point 3 is still kind of broad. Okay, point 8 out of his list is a thing unto itself. I'm not condensing it with anything else. Out of his 14 points. Selective populism. A personality cult around a leader who projects the image that he is the incarnation of the people's will. That he speaks for the people and is an extension of them. Now this ties back in with the militarism and machismo points, that the fictionalized propaganda image of the leader that they try to present to everyone is what in psychology terms is a projection of what people want to be. That people want to be the leader, vicariously he's them. It's like a celebrity cult where you project everything you perceive as good onto a celebrity. That, you know, as they say, the girls want to do him and the guys want to be him. For a celebrity, saying it's this celebrity cult around a political leader, as opposed to just some elder statesman politician. That this is this rock star guy we want to be. If you look at stuff like Mussolini shirtless hunting, Hitler's public image, that while he wasn't like this shirtless tough guy, when you look at like History Channel stuff about the propaganda image of Hitler that was presented to the German people at the time, was that he was this warrior because he'd been in World War I. I'm one of you. I was a foot soldier in World War I. I'm this tough guy. And this mentality of he's tough. He's, even now, they phrased what he was, like the Munich Agreement and stuff. He's fighting the French and British. He's a fighter. And because people want to be that. And this, the psychology term of projection. So it's this bizarre contrast that even as the leader, the Führer, or El Duce, is taking away your voting rights, your specific power, he's giving off this aura that I am one of you. I am acting for you. And you're so desperate, like after the Depression, or after Italy lost so much in the Depression, you're so desperate and want this person to be your savior that you just project onto them whatever you want. That this guy isn't a Beltway insider. He's not an establishment politician. He's one of us. And speaks for the people. But he took away all your voting rights. He's throwing out all those stupid politicians who didn't care about us. He is doing what we wanted to take that against the establishment politicians. So it's this bizarre selective populism that they support his basically revenge against the old politicians, and the idea that he speaks for us, even though, well, you speak for you when you vote. Then again, even theme 3 here is something that you see in other authoritarian regimes, like communism, that there was a personality cult around Mao Zedong in China, that he actually came from an agrarian background, that he's one of us, that the Kim dynasty in North Korea, to an extent, there's a personality cult. Stalin, even to an extent, but the big one is Mao Zedong, that there is a celebrity cult around this leader who is, I am one of you, I'm speaking for the people, of how hurt we are, when you aren't one of us, you're a politician. So now there's 6 points left, and I still haven't gotten to the specific fascist things. Now we do. These next 4 are all condensed into 1 point. Appeal to a frustrated and fearful middle class. That the people in charge don't want change. And if this was a bottom-up revolution, overthrowing society, well, that's what communism is. It's a bottom-up working class thing. Again, if you've read Orwell, you've read 1984, which is actually about communism, not fascism, that point where he's reading the essay at the end and it goes that there's class struggle is between the low, the middle, and the high. Revolution never comes from the high because they're already in power. It either comes from the middle class or the lower class, and one or the other. And communism, and again, in communism, it's you just replace, they just become the new rulers. But the rhetoric of socialism and communism is we're going to overthrow society, and it appeals to the working class. Fascism is about the fearful middle class, who are afraid of the communists below them, while at the same time feeling that they are left powerless, that the high, the top tier, the people currently in charge, the establishment politicians, have disenfranchised them. So when you see their rhetoric, unlike communist rhetoric that we're going to have a revolution and completely reorder society, there'll be no private property, fascists don't promise to overthrow society. They explicitly see it as returning to the good old days. That we're going to make Germany great again. And even though it is radically reorganizing society, they try not to present it like that. They try to present it as, let's return to when things were good. Which is really just, it's not intellectual. It's this instinctive reflex action. Fascism is inherently reactionary. And it's this perceived good old days that might not even have existed. So, point 1, also the name of the whole theme, is appeal to a frustrated and fearful middle class. Other ways you do that, including with that, are you make what he lists, Echo lists, as an appeal against intruders, the fear of difference, that redirect them against, you are under attack. The major thing they say is, we will make Germany great again. You are under constant attack by people who want to destroy your way of life. That's what fascism is. It's trying to sway people and manipulate them emotionally, not on an intellectual level. So in Germany, this was, they're outsiders who are different from us, others who are also intruding on our way of life. So Jews or other religious dissidents, immigrants. In Italy, they actually didn't have anti-Jewish rhetoric until the Germans forced them to. In Italy, it was, the communists are trying to take us over. The communists and the bomb-throwing anarchists were really what they turned it against, as well as the ruling class that they felt had failed them. But you need to build up fear of the other, that you are under attack, because then people will hand over their power to you. And the extension of that, the third point here, and these overlap extensively in Echo's list here, obsession with a plot against the people. That's why I'm condensing these. You see, it's your fearful middle class, people different from you are coming here, and not only are they coming here passively, like immigrants are coming and taking the jobs. Third point in this theme is they are actively plotting against you. So, for Nazi Germany, it was this whole myth of there is an international Jewish conspiracy, this cabal, which is all the bankers and stuff, which is actively having planning meetings, ordering politicians what to do, and who are trying to destroy us. Not just passively as this is economic rivalry or anything, but there is a conspiracy. There is a QAnon out there, basically, that is trying to demonstrate that there's a lot of features with the conspiracy theorists. For Italy, it was the communists are trying to conspire against us, which, given that communism had this rhetoric of we need to expand to every country, might not even have been necessarily wrong, but on a specific level that, like, they are plotting against you. That the Germany really rounded up and killed all the homosexuals, that the homosexuals are plotting actively to turn your children. The Jews are plotting against you, that there are outsiders who are actively plotting against us and trying to destroy us. And yeah, like McCarthyism in the 1950s was also fascism, because it was the communists or spies are everywhere. And all of this leads to the fourth point in this theme, all interrelated, what Eco called mass elitism. That national identity is the ultimate privilege. That merely for being German, you are superior to these subhumans. And it is linked to not just that this is a privilege, this concept of contempt for the weak. Contempt, not just that they're attacking us, they are both attacking us and we look down on them. The word he uses is contempt. Contempt for others, contempt for the weak. So, like, you look down on these filthy immigrants, these filthy different religions. You don't see them as rivals on your level, but somehow beneath you. And that's when Eco points out is one of the contradictions of fascism. That you're simultaneously building up and tearing down enemies, that at the same time, there's this scary enemy who's actively plotting against you, and there's spies everywhere. Give me all of your political power, take away your voting rights, we'll build up the military. You need to do this because the enemy is strong, and they could destroy you. While at the same time presenting this idea of, like, and I keep using the Germany just as a good example, of simply by being German and middle class, you are already an Aryan Superman, and you will crush the Jews and immigrants like cockroaches. Well, if I'm a Superman, they're not really a threat to me, are they? You see the contradiction? How can it be both? And Eco points this out, thankfully giving hope against fascist regimes like Make Germany Great Again. He says this is one of the reasons fascist movements will inherently fail. They have no ability to accurately gauge their enemy's strength or their own strength, because in their minds they are already perfect, and the enemy is simultaneously this scary boogeyman, but also subhumans, Untermen, who are incapable of actually fighting us. So that was one of the big reasons that the Nazis made really stupid decisions during World War II, is, oh, that will never happen, they're not capable of that. That they constantly overestimated themselves and underestimated their enemies because they believed their own propaganda that they were the master race. A lot of them, anyway. But all of these points, that rhetoric of the reactionariness of this, it's almost instinctive clutching to tradition like that. You appeal to a frustrated and fearful middle class. Not the people who were in power, and you're not trying to overtly overthrow everything. You're paying lip service to this as we're going back to the good old days. Skipping ahead a bit, even the Empire never really said we're overthrowing the Republic. They said we're reorganizing the Republic. This is, we transformed into a better version of the Republic when we made the Empire. But like the military is still the same, allegedly grew into that gradually. That they don't frame it as we're trying to overthrow everything, even though they really are. Oh, this might confuse some of you if you're not familiar with it, that in pop culture, there's this trope that Nazis are these German aristocrats with monocles and University of Heidelberg dueling scars. The Nazi aristocrat. I think even TV Tropes has a page on this to point out it's not an accurate trope. Some Nazis were aristocrats, but the core of the Nazis' support and power base in Germany were the middle class, not the aristocrats. The shopkeepers and craftsmen, who were the rising middle class in the 1800s, who were angry that the economy was really bad after they lost World War I, and felt that the rigid old Prussian military aristocracy, who had dominated Germany since its unification, had led them to disaster in World War I. If you know nothing about German unification, basically Prussia, which is in the northeast, which was militarily very strong, united the rest of Germany in the Franco-Prussian War in the 1870s. And going into World War I with like Kaiser Bill and stuff, Kaiser Wilhelm, the leadership of the German Empire were the old Prussian military aristocracy. And a lot of the Nazi rhetoric was, these aristocrats led us to disaster. They don't care about you, the normal people. But when they said normal people, they meant the middle class. Because, like, the steel mill workers and stuff were being attracted by the socialists. So the working class didn't support them that much either. Yes, there were exceptions. Yes, on a general level of make Germany great again, many of the working class got swayed to it. But again, not just my analysis. I've seen many articles, many history shows about this. The core of the Nazis were a populist movement, and you think populism is lower class. It's from the middle class. That you're not even suffering as much as the working class. But you feel you're under attack, feel you've been disenfranchised, so then they feed you all this racist rhetoric about the Jews are out to get you, the immigrants are out to get you, you are under attack, you are suffering. Wait, no, the working class is suffering more than me. But it's you inflame the middle class using that kind of rhetoric and fear of the other, and you turn it on the people who were in charge. Some aristocrats were attracted to Nazi ideology anyway, but they kind of always thought they were riffraff. That there were, when you see it in TV tropes and in movies, there were some German aristocrats who fell in with it, and there were some workers, but generally when you're looking at the core of it, it's not, because it's along the middle class. So let's put all of this into one phrase. Frustrated and fearful middle class feels besieged from a plot by outsiders. Under communism, we the people are being oppressed by the upper classes. It's pretty simple and straightforward. Not the same thing at all. So that's 13 points, and I've condensed them down to 4 major themes. The final 14th point, which stands on its own because it's that important, though it's kind of related to the last one. And this is the 5th and final theme I'll present here, of simplifying this down. And it is the most crucial out of all of them. The cult of tradition is a major, major feature that distinguishes fascism from other authoritarian states and regimes. That it's, quote, they want to give the appearance of reinforcing pre-existing structures, values, and beliefs, end quote, which leads to what I feel is perhaps the most bizarre and intriguing aspect of fascism. Quote, cultural syncretism even at the risk of internal contradiction. They appeal to tradition without regard for what tradition means in that context. Because any country has a diverse history and political landscape. So it has multiple traditions. Even in the United States, I'd say, like, I live in New York tradition isn't 100% the same as Massachusetts tradition or Pennsylvania tradition, and these are northern states altogether. Even in Britain, within England or in France, there are regional differences. And Germany wasn't a unified, well, politically unified within living memory during World War II. 1870 they were unified. There were many different traditions. There were different religious traditions in different regions. That just as there was the rise of nationalism in the late 1800s, promoted this idea that we are one unified culture of Germans or one unified culture of Italians, that we are all paisan, when, well, no, Sicilians didn't think of themselves as the same country as people from the north. That these were different regions, that it promoted this artificial idea of national identity to promote their political agendas. That we are one Italian tradition, one German tradition, when no, we are actually a diverse, somewhat multicultural, multi-idea society that, out of one many, ex pluribus unum. That, and even European states, not even looking at the United States, that we are already kind of diverse, and they present this idea of there's one tradition. So this is the part where I said I really wanted to show images of the Nuremberg rallies and the marches they had, because I've seen documentaries explaining this, how ridiculous it was. That when you see footage of the Nuremberg rallies, not the big things with the actual Nazi leadership, I mean the day-long marches leading up to that, they would feature horse riders dressed like medieval Germanic knights. And fascist Italy would appeal to rhetoric about ancient Rome, at fasces in Rome. Even Imperial Japan had the cult of the emperor and the samurai code, which was by that point already anachronistic, that they had no power anymore by that point. That you'd have within the same march this mix of horse riders dressed like medieval Germanic knights and people dressed up like pagan Germanic, allegedly Aryan, that isn't a real term, pagan heroes from Wagner and stuff, or political leaders from Prussia when other parts of Germany hated Prussia, and they're all in the same damn parade. Or Italy would be appealing to Rome and ancient Rome, pagan Rome, symbols, and Christianity symbols simultaneously in the same political march, side by side. So this is one of the big things with the cult of tradition, not just that it's for tradition, but the syncretism. That fascism, on an emotional level, because you're not thinking about it intellectually, appeals to all of these traditions simultaneously and mashes them together in a way that, if you stood back and analyzed it intellectually, is incoherent. And there's all these examples of how that they would cynically pander to the church while at the same time appeal to like nationalist figures who hammered the church, or pagan heroes. Another big one is that Germany courted a lot of the support of the local church. There was also underground resistance by church members, but a lot of their rhetoric of we're hammering the homosexuals and the Jews, many religious leaders, not all of them, were on board with. Or a better example, I get a decent number of viewers on my channel from Spain. I've seen documentaries pointing out how Francisco Franco's Spain did the same thing, where they would cynically appeal to tradition and family values or whatever, and Franco courted the support of the Catholic Church in Spain to do that, even though he didn't really care about the church or politics. You attack the other, you attack fringe social groups or religious groups because, well, the dirty communists are trying to take out religion. We are your friend, help support us. So Franco's Spain did that a lot. Particularly if you're from Catalonia, you know he did that a lot, because he hammered them for being, they were more of a cosmopolitan society in that part of the country. But you see this repeated very frequently, that they'll co-opt the pre-existing structures like that, even at the risk of contradiction. Or turning back to the Germany example, in the same, like, even as they vilified the old Prussian military aristocracy, they'd go, Bismarck, Otto von Bismarck was the founder of modern Germany. Yeah, supporting Prussia. Bismarck helped Prussia, led Prussia to unite Germany. And he was doing it for the Prussian military aristocracy. Or Hitler really admired Frederick the Great, who fought during Napoleonic Wars and stuff. And Frederick the Great was a Prussian military aristocrat. Why would you like him? He's one of the guys in the leadership you hated, who you were also having rhetoric led us to disaster. But it's contradictory. And this is really best exemplified by the name of the Nazi movement itself. Nazi is a contraction of National Socialism. Okay, so they're the National Socialists. That name is gibberish. That the full name is the National Socialist Workers' Party. And seen documentaries on this. Yes, it is intentionally ambiguous. In the United States terms, it's like calling it the Democratic Republican National Union Party. Let that sink in. That name is ridiculous. In more general terms, for like Britain and stuff, it'd be like calling it the Liberal Conservative Workers Union Party. That it is intentionally casting a wide net because they wanted more people to join. And they didn't really care that it was contradictory. What I really liked is, it wasn't the best TV movie, but it was this TV movie back in 2000 about the Nuremberg Trials. Alec Baldwin played the American prosecutor. Christopher Plummer was the British prosecutor, so they had a good cast. They had Brian Cox was in it. And it's this one scene, and they based this on real interviews, where what I liked about it was this happened in real life. They had a psychologist interview all of the captured Nazi leaders to try to get a feel for what are they like, why did this happen from a historical perspective, how can we attack them during the prosecution, of finding just how do they tick. And in his report, it was fascinating of just going through what they all said. Now, the one who gave the most honest answer was Albert Speer, who was, just an architect, but he went along with the Nazis. But he wasn't just, spouting the rhetoric by that point. He knew it was all a sham by that point. He just opened up. And he was just brutally honest at that point. That there's this exchange where the psychologist asks, well, for the sake of history, can you tell me what exactly was the ideology of the Nazi movement in your own words? What was the ethos of it that you were trying to articulate? And Speer just responds to them, incredulously, what ideas, what ideology make Germany great again? There was no coherent ideology. The Nazi state was built on empty catchphrases and cheap platitudes. And the psychologist goes back to him, you, an intelligent, educated man, were duped, and so many other educated people were won over by nothing but empty catchphrases and cheap platitudes. And he looks back at him and goes, yes, they worked because they were vague. Because being vague, you could pour into them any meaning you wanted. Margaret Atwood, the Canadian sci-fi writer, said in the prologue to The Handmaid's Tale that Gilead, which is the TV show, Gilead is not, at its core, a religious regime. They are a fascist regime that uses the trappings of religion. And some of the members have even kind of half convinced themselves it is about religion, but when you see most of them privately, they're breaking their own rules at brothels and stuff. And she explains all this in the prologue. Tell me if you've read that, the book version. Atwood said, I'm playing into the old adage that when fascism comes to America, to the United States, it will come carrying a cross and draped in an American flag. That fascism reappropriates a society's core imagery on a superficial level, even a contradictory way. And Atwood felt that due to, the Pilgrims and the many religious movements, the Great Awakening and stuff in America, that America has always had strong religious movements. Particularly compared to Europe, where they've gone through the Enlightenment and everything, and wars of religion so much that you don't see, Mormon migrations, or the Second Great Awakening, or tent revivals to nearly the same extent in Europe that you do in the United States. It is fundamentally, the cities are different, but the society as a whole is not really secular. It does have, America is prone to religious movements. So, again, I can't show imagery, but it's fascinating. When I started making this video, it was early January, right? And a lot of newspapers and TV channels were running documentaries about the January 6th insurrection. And there's these fascinating breakdowns where they look up this on your own, they break down the imagery and iconography at the January 6th insurrection and these QAnon things. It's a mishmash of stuff from all over the place. That they fascinating, they're going, the imagery these different groups are displaying isn't uniform. It's a hodgepodge of different things. Some of them are religious, like Jesus supports our thing. Others are very strictly military and gun imagery. Some have historical imagery, like from the American Patriots of the Revolutionary War. And many of them contradict each other. That how are you for both of these things? Or like Jesus with an AK-47 in his hand or something. What? It doesn't make sense. Just as with how can you be supporting both things, the double think, to use the term. That's exactly what you saw at Nuremberg rallies or Mussolini, where you'd see how are you having pagan ancient heroes next to Christian figures and popular nationalist figures from the political party you hate because, well, they happen to be popular. How can you co-opt both of these? Or rhetoric about the founding fathers, which is contradictory. That this is par of the course. Fascism is just cynically appealing to traditions like cynically appealing to the church for political support. Not that they really believe that. That's another thing Putin did, where he's been cynically appealing to the church by persecuting homosexuals, not because he has an ideology, but just because I need support. You appeal to tradition. You even appeal to multiple traditions. Going back to the Nuremberg thing that Speer told the psychologist, we would just tell every town we went to on a tour, we tell them what they wanted to hear, tailored to that specific town. So if we were in a particularly religious area, we'd hype up the religious aspect. If it was one of the old Prussian regions, we'd talk about we're going to unify again. If we were one of the anti-Prussian regions, we'd talk about the failure of the old administration. It's like when you follow any politician, but taken to an absurd level. When they go from town to town, from the coal mining town to the city to the farmer, they're not expressing a coherent idea. That they tell everyone in turn what they want to hear, even when it blatantly contradicts each other. Yeah, politicians do that to an extent, but they usually, like in modern times, normal politicians know they're on TV and not to contradict themselves too much. Whereas this is like the same parade would have contradictory imagery in it. And it's just the psychological term projection of it's whatever you think is traditional because it's inherently reactionary. We are under attack. Let's go back to the good old days of tradition. So that's really, for me, the most fascinating part of all of this. And it ties in with that no analytical thinking. Criticism is bad. That if you point out the contradictions, it is riddled with contradictions of the cult of tradition. They can't stand for that, so they don't. So, how does all of this fit within the Star Wars galaxy? How could we apply that? Well, what is the core story objectively? As with many governments like the Roman Empire and stuff, the Old Republic was weak. It turned into a bloated bureaucracy of corrupt senators who cared only about lining their own pockets and not the common good. Palpatine says this in the first movie, Episode 1. Happened with Rome, got repeated in like the Ottoman Empire. When empires get old and decay, bloated bureaucracy, and you can either have a reform movement, which then resets everything, or it can enter a collapse. Palpatine was elected to try to rein in all of these corrupt bureaucrats, used a crisis to get emergency powers, then so quickly swept aside the vilified old bureaucrats that people welcomed it. And that crisis he used was the Clone Wars, the Separatist crisis. So, okay, he used a crisis, he engineered a crisis, we are under attack. What exactly was that? The Separatists, the Confederacy of Independent Systems, wanted to secede because the central government was corrupt. Expanded universe materials elaborate this more, that it generally, the story of the Clone Wars, the power blocks formed around the core worlds versus the Rim. That the powerful systems that originated the Republic were in the core of the galaxy. They became the core worlds, the Coruscant, Alderaan, Kot. And gradually the Republic spread out around the wheel of the galaxy to the Outer Rim. So the mid-rim planets, Outer Rim, there's always exceptions, but generally it was the core worlds were the core of the Republic versus the Rim. The capital versus the provinces. So it's like Rome. It's like this is Coruscant, the core worlds are Italy. This is Gallic Empire, Palmyra, Egypt, all the fringe, which is against the central government now. Everyone got so scared by this war that they were willing to embrace militarism to have peace and security. So the threat that the Empire used as a scapegoat wasn't really religious dissidents like Jews or something, ethnic, or foreign, like foreign immigrants, or even internal economic ideologies like communism, that there's going to be a revolution from within by the communists. It wasn't ethnic, religious, economic. The threat was geographic. It's the capital versus the provinces. There was a civil war over the power base between them. So in terms of the Star Wars galaxy, the constant threat by the other that a fascist regime needs was filled by the separatists. And they don't stress this quite enough, that I want more Star Wars things to have Imperials going, we brought order to the galaxy, because the old republic was falling apart, and also say, you don't want the separatists to come back, do you? Like they're their version of 1920s bomb-throwing anarchists. And then how did Palpatine sweep away the Galactic Senate? Well, he blamed the core world senators. Think Mon Mothma in the half-empty Senate in Andor. Palpatine developed this rhetoric that the Senate is too corrupt to really deal with our problems, that this out-of-touch leadership, with parallels to how the Nazis blamed everything on the old Prussian aristocrats who dominated Germany's World War I government and military. Even Italy, which was technically on the winning side, blamed the old leadership. So the old leadership is bad, their bureaucracy is corrupt, I will streamline everything along military lines with me in charge. That they blame the establishment. And the core world senators like Mon Mothma are the establishment politicians. Conversely, most of the Rim provinces tended to not be humans. That the core worlds, luck of the draw, were mostly human worlds, like Alderaan, like Coruscant. No one knows exactly where humans came from, their homeworld is lost to history, but by the time the Republic was around, that there were these different human-colonized planets, each of which had their own culture by that point. Now there's exceptions on both sides, like Naboo is in the mid-Rim, that there are one or two core worlds that are non-human. But the old Legends continuity before the prequel movies established that the Empire had anti-alien rhetoric, but didn't really explain why, other than they're generic racists. Why are there human supremacists? That retroactively they came up with, well, generally more of the separatists were non-human and the core worlds are mostly human. But even like Count Dooku is human, but they've tried to set that up as, it's not so much that they're aliens as, I know Wookiees are not from the core worlds. You're a Wookiee, not just you're an alien, you're not human, it's you're a non-core worlder. You're from the Rim, you're from the provinces. Is anti-droid sentiment due to slavery? I mean, according to spin-offs and such, I don't really think you could play the fascist angle with droids, because even the Empire still uses, like, spy droids and stuff. Probe droids, that there was always anti-droid sentiment due to labor, religion, past robot uprisings and in regional level. Just in general, there was always some anti-robot sentiment. I mean, the prequels tried to establish that a lot of the later anti-droid sentiment was due to how much the battle droid army was used in the Clone Wars. That didn't help, but there's always been anti-droid sentiment. Even the Empire uses droids, so I don't think you could use them as the scapegoat when you're fielding droids. So no, if you're looking for the other that fascism needs to blame, you're talking about separatists, which overlaps with aliens to a degree, because you're alien because you're from the Rim, the humans are from the core. So now, having gone through all of these points of fascism and condensed it down to 4 or 5 broad, simple themes, how would we depict the Galactic Empire in Star Wars as not only authoritarian, but specifically fascist, by the characteristics outlined by Umberto Eco? Well, I actually took 2 of the themes and combined them into one thing for point 1 here, so now we have 4 points, but I want to simplify it. Point 1, I can reduce it to a phrase. We need to embrace the militarism of the Empire's authoritarian state to prevent another uprising by the Outer Rim provinces. That is the mentality and it's implied in Star Wars, and Lucas has always said that, you know, he manipulated the Clone Wars to happen so people would give Palpatine emergency powers. That you need to have characters overtly saying this. The Imperial characters in Andor need to be verbalizing why they buy into the propaganda, that the mentality of we believe in the Empire, that the propaganda thing of we must maintain a strong military and reduce, like, the right to a trial and stuff, because, well, we're maintaining order. Or have someone say, overtly, in words, we need to strip mine this planet to build up the Empire's glorious war machine, to maintain the supremacy of the core world so all the non-human planets in the Outer Rim don't revolt again. The up to now, because it's on a kid level for cartoons and stuff, they generally just have people say, for the glory of the Empire, for security, for order. You have to say what they want security from, what they feel is the threat to order. The boogeyman that Palpatine has built up is from above and below. From below, it's the provinces are going to revolt again, the non-human provinces in the Outer Rim, and at the same time, building up that the bureaucrats of the old imperial senators failed you. Those people up top that expressed political pluralism and dialogue, they failed to stop this through negotiation, their pluralism. That it led to the separatist crisis, only Palpatine was able to reel it back in once he got emergency powers. So that's point 2. Play up that there's a personality cult around the Emperor, that it was specifically Palpatine got this sympathy thing for, he led us through the Clone Wars. And then on top of that, they briefly allude that he played up that the Jedi tried to overthrow me at the end, and I was deformed by their attack. Look what a poor martyr I am. But my resolve is still strong to defend all of you. So this idea that the Emperor led us through the Clone Wars, put down an alleged Jedi revolt, and that, quote, the Emperor reflects the will of the people better than those corrupt senators ever did. Like Season 2 of Andor, when they're really dismantling the Senate in form, as well as, unofficially. As Mon Mothma's having what little power she has left completely stripped, have an Imperial shoot back at her who genuinely believes, you corrupt senators and your dialogue and backdealing is what led to the separatist crisis in the first place, and even those of you who weren't corrupt didn't know how to deal with it effectively. The Emperor reflects the will of the people better than you, and by the will of the people, they mean the core worlds. The normal people, as they feel, who weren't at the Senate level, the planet-leading level, but the mid-level guys. The local planetary governors or big bankers are like, finally they're sharing the wealth more. So you see them doing that. They just replaced one bureaucracy with another, but they're, from their perspective, look how great this is. We are the people. You're the middle class. You're the regional governors from the core worlds. But it's build up this militarism, build up security. The aliens from the Outer Rim are out to get us because they want to secede again. The Emperor is great for really promoting the normal people against those corrupt senators and against the separatists. Point 3, also relatively easy to do, would be to slap in a bit more propaganda and intellectual censorship. Andor did this pretty well, but more, to show that people are internalizing it. Specifically the newspeak stuff, as Orwell called it, the neologisms, that fascist regimes do this, Soviets, communism does this too, any cult really does this, where they develop neologisms and acronyms to refer to things to limit your thought. So the heavy use of acronyms, like have people, I think they did that in Season 1 a bit, when what's the acronym they use to refer to the Prison Reform Act, which is basically you don't have right to a trial by jury anymore. But they refer to it by an acronym to distance themselves from its actual meaning. That they don't need to think about what it really means. Or that Imperial Security Bureau's parent organization that oversees other Imperial things. This was in the Legends continuity, and I've checked, it's true for canon as well, that up the chain of command, the Imperial Security Bureau is part of the Commission for the Preservation of the New Order, which is known by the acronym COMPNOR. So have the Imperials talking in newspeak a bit more, like have them saying COMPNOR needs ISB to do this for the PRI Prison Reform Act. Like fascists talk in phrases like that. Even Nazi Germany, I mean, like, they would intentionally use ambiguous phrases, even when they weren't acronyms, just to distance themselves from their real meaning. Like the Security Squad, which was the SS, the Special Task Forces, which were the Death Squads, and then from Security Squad you get SS, the acronyms to destroy thought, like COMPNOR, or the prison thing. Just do that more, of showing how fascist regimes try to limit thought through propaganda. But I think they've been doing all this to an extent. I just want them to overtly do it more. And it might very well come up when the Emperor is dismantling the Senate. That you see people blaming Mon Mothma that, well, the Emperor speaks for us. That we, the core worlds, need to be taken care of. So it wouldn't really even change that much. It's just you need to be a little more overt with it. I don't think we'll even get this in a TV show, but in like one of the really good tie-in books, like the Tarkin book, really emphasizing how this came to be, of why did some people embrace the Empire's mentality and their propaganda. But the key for me is the fourth and final theme. Remember, I combined the first two, so now it's down to four. The cult of tradition, which in many ways is the core feature of fascism, this reactionary thing by the middle-class group who feels threatened from without. It's this instinctive retreat, reflex action, back to embrace traditional symbols. Even when they're contradictory, you're not thinking, it's emotional. Retreat to the cult of tradition when you feel external threats and changes in society make you under attack. Well, the problem with that is that the Galactic Republic has many different traditions, more than a real life, like a single European country or something. There are massively different traditions on different planets, even among the same species, because the different human planets have their own cultures, like Corellia versus Alderaan or something. What are common cultural features that unify not necessarily the whole Republic, just the core worlds even? What is the common history of the core worlds that the Empire could pay lip service to? The Imperial Senate, the Jedi, they got rid of those. I mean, to use the Nazi Germany analogy, the Senate are like the Prussian aristocracy with the Kaiser, who they blamed for the crisis that led to the creation of the Empire. Scapegoated. So it's not the traditions of the Senate or the Jedi. What are other common historical things for the core worlds? Maybe play up heroes from their ancient history, like when what's it, the Infinite Empire with the Rakata invasion. I know that's in the video game, of ancient wars that they had in the past. Show them playing this up in their pop culture, in their rhetoric of we're defending the traditions of the Republic, by which they mean the core worlds, by which they mean the Empire now. Maybe. But thinking on it, I realized they were actually doing this already in Season 1 of Andor. It was really good writing. Look at how Season 1 showed Mon Mothma's daughter rebelling against her relatively liberal, cosmopolitan political views. Mon Mothma has political views of democracy and pluralism and dialogue with the Outer Rim, that they didn't want to make an empire dominating the provinces. They wanted to reform the Republic from within. That you see her, it even has dialogue with her outright saying something like, oh, your daughter's rebelling against you by being like an anarchist or something, and she goes, well, no, I have progressive views. My daughter is rebelling against me by embracing traditionalist views. That she's like one of those 1980s shows where you see the hippie parents, and what was it, Michael J. Fox or something, was the young conservative kid rebelling against the liberal parents, just to embrace the opposite of what the parents think. That was a fascinating scene. I'll try to link to it below or something, where you see, and she's observing her daughter gathering with a traditionalist Chandrillan group. Chandrilla is their homeworld, and they're chanting like, the old ways guide us, the old ways bind us, the old ways are best. Almost cult-like, and you realize the Empire is, in the Star Wars galaxy, the Galactic Empire is pandering to the local elites from the core worlds. Not the senator class, but the planetary governors, the powerful families, the powerful bankers, and so forth, and just telling them whatever they want to hear. I think of Organa's cousin from a Kenobi. That one scene actually said a lot, where he's like, hey, we should discuss that there's slavery in the Outer Rim now. He's like, hey, I just came here to eat your food. Isn't it great how the Empire's sharing the wealth more? Because they got rid of the senators, and now the planetary governors are becoming the new local elites. You replaced one set of bureaucrats with another. But from their perspective, it's, wow, look at how they're taking care of us, the normal people. They define normal people as actually the mid-level power brokers from the core worlds. So how would you best show how the cult of tradition isn't just a thing, that you're seeing the Empire is pandering to, we are defending the traditions and way of life of the core worlds. as you see with Mon Mothma's daughter going, I embrace that you have an arranged marriage in your young teens as tradition among our aristocracy. I embrace that. You need to show that they're contradictory. Because every core world has its own different culture. I mean, Corellia isn't like Chandrilla or Alderaan or Kott or some of the other ones. So, like, have someone from... My advice is either in Season 2 or a different spin-off or a book. Contrast, have someone remark on the contradiction. That have Mon Mothma's daughter going, I embrace the old ways, the Empire defends the core world's old ways. Have someone go, I'm Corellian and our tradition is to marry for love and never before we're 30 because they don't think we're mature enough yet to settle down. That is what our culture is, and we're just as much of a core world as Chandrilla is. But not just that, have, like, show the Empire promoting when they're on Corellia, don't marry before you're 30. In contrast with, and it could be other traditions, just other local heroes, but showing how this is the opposite of what they're encouraging the Chandrillan local youth and elites to do. To show that they're giving a contradictory message at each core world, like how artificial nationalism was in the late 1800s, this mystique of we don't have any differences, we're all Italians, we're all Germans. We have one culture, not a diverse culture, rich in its diversity, out of one many. They're saying this fiction of that there's a united core worlds culture that they're defending when really they're not. It would be a central thing of what fascism always does. Acts as if there was one good old days when there was never one make Germany great again moment, when there was a unified culture. Even during the Rakata invasions, I think it was many different planets, even then, with many different cultures that were never that unified. So I was really intrigued when I was already making this video and I realized, are they setting that up with Mon Mothma's daughter? This is one of the points of fascism, is the cult of tradition. And they don't even tell us that much about it, other than, well, we have arranged marriages when we're young. It's this scene of her just going, the old ways bind us, the old ways keep us. It doesn't matter what the effing hell the old ways are. They can even be contradictory old ways plural, not just the old way for her specifically. What matters is that they're old. What matters is that they're tradition. It can even be multiple traditions. Fascism cynically panders to this emotional retrenchment reaction to change. Like, I'm scared, let's pull back to tradition. And the syncretism of it'll pander to all of them at the same time, and because it's anti-intellectual, people will refuse to admit the contradiction. So I actually think they're already testing the waters with some of the... this is something I'd ask, like, you've been really trying to show the Empire as a fascist state. Have you been following Umberto Eco's checklist? Because if you didn't, you managed to match it really well. Maybe they weren't thinking of Eco, but like him, they were both, inspired by what actually happened in history with fascist movements in Germany and Italy and stuff. And I'd be surprised if they didn't know of his essay, because it's very famous. So I was just surprised at just how political it was and how well it showed a fascist state, but there's improvement to be done. That when we get the new set of tie-in spin-off books, spin-off series, spin-off comics about Andor, really emphasizing the politics of the Empire and the rebellion more than fight scenes, show that there's this specifically fascist mentality, and not just we're this pastiche of the Nazi imagery and authoritarian state, but how it's co-opted traditionalism plus scaring people into believing in it. Would be very interesting.